these are the facts based on Fish and Game annual counts and surveys over the last nearly 3 decades. There's an abundance of elk.
Carter, thank you for coming back, sir.
My pleasure.
So you and I spoke originally. I've had a lot of people in and out of Fish and Game. Charlie Justice was fantastic. He came in. Pat Cudmore came in. But then I had a ton of people that were also independents that came in that, might be engaged in hunting and fishing or wolf trapping or all kinds of different things as well. One thing that is very clear, though, is your clip where you were talking about the populations of wolves in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and how those numbers are higher. People lost their mind over it. They're like, this is impossible. The number of people that said bullshit, I couldn't believe it. It's like the comments are just filled up with that. But I kept replying to people, or as many as I could, that, hey, look, I think Carter is just talking about published numbers from these state fish and game departments. I wanted to have you back on for a number of reasons, but to talk about this and help, at least help people understand what your position was, that you're not just pulling these numbers out of your hat. And if they want to disagree with the fish and game departments, that's 100% fine. But you sent me tons of articles as well, talking about different states actually, for instance, Wyoming opening up or contemplating opening up unlimited elk tads because the herds and size of elk numbers in Wyoming were so great. So again, that's why we're here. That's what we're going to get into.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm happy to be here, and maybe if nothing else, I'm giving people a different viewpoint. But yeah, as far as talking about elk, there's no problem with a shortage of elk in the United States, and especially west of the Missouri, and these western states have an abundance of elk. And tying this to wolves, we did the wolf reintroductions in 95 and 96. And since that time, elk populations in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, which we always end up talking about, all those populations of elk have increased during that time. The wolves have had absolutely no impact whatsoever. And this is not my data. This is not my opinion. These are the facts based on Fish and Game annual counts and surveys over the last nearly 3 decades. There's an abundance of elk. Certainly, somebody can probably find a unit somewhere that elk numbers have declined, because all species populations, they have the peaks and troughs for a whole number of reasons. But overall, those populations are tremendously improved since wolves come in. So the information's there if you're willing to read it and look it up, and it's not hard to find. And like Wyoming, you mentioned just now, I mean, they're talking about too many elk and giving unlimited tags. One legislator, I guess, even talking about bringing in helicopters to shoot them.
My gosh. And that was in that article you sent me.
Yes. And recently, within the last month, one of the big headlines come out of Wyoming is they set a record harvest this past year. A record. So what does that tell you about the influence of wolves in Wyoming, too? No influence whatsoever. The elk are growing by leaps and bounds, and if you've got good habitat, and in many respects, elk habitat's improving in a lot of places because you've got irrigated alfalfa, you've got irrigated hay ground, you've got all this farmland that supports elk herds that have their calves in those vicinities. There's probably little herds of elk getting bigger every year that the elk don't even know what, the forest environment is all about, where people think that's where they should live. But again, this is not something I'm making up or my opinion. It's the facts. So anyone who's telling you that wolves have had a devastating effect on elk, it's just not true. If you're looking at the population, if you want to pick your backyard and say, well, look what happened here, well, make sure you consider suburbia and urban sprawl and destruction or elimination of winter range. There's a lot of things that impact elk numbers, but certainly wolves are probably one of the most minuscule concerns that you have.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com. Let's look at a specific population, because one of the things that people brought up instantaneously was, hey, what about the Yellowstone herd? And I asked you about this because, again, I know, and you never disputed it. I said, hey, look, the Yellowstone herd sounds like it went from, roughly 20,000 down to like 4,000. And that's a number that people reference over and over and over. And you had, again, information about this that I had never heard and never really considered. So if you wouldn't mind sharing what you told me.
All right. Well, I'm a wildlife biologist, but I'm a historian too these days. It's because I've been around a long time out west. Yeah, I moved from Iowa to Montana in 1973. And in 1974, I had read about the opportunity to get a late elk tag and go elk hunting over around Yellowstone. So a colleague and I went over, and I had my first elk hunt of my life. I'd never even thought about going elk hunting before. But yeah, at the time, they had this late elk hunt in January or February, well after the seasons were over, the regular seasons. And so, yeah, we went over there, and here's hundreds, probably thousands of elk, not too far from the highway. Snow is deep, and so we hiked in this drainage, and we were in there, I don't know, a couple hours, and some elk come out of the woods, and we shot them, and then if you wait till noon, outfitters would come in with horses, or you could even take snow machines in there and pick up the dead elk. It was no effort whatsoever. But the whole point of those late elk hunts was there's too many elk in Yellowstone and in that northern elk herd. So they've been doing that, I don't know for how many years before that I moved to Montana, but they were still doing it in the 80s and up until the 90s, trying to get that herd down. Well, the only thing that was really impacting that elk herd around Yellowstone are severe winters. They had a couple of years different years where the elk died by the thousands laying along the highway. They starved to death in the deep snow. So it's always been the goal to get this elk herd reduced. So along comes the wolf reintroduction in 1995 and 96, and at that time, that herd was in decline for a whole number of reasons. I mean, you've got grizzly bears that eat them, black bears, mountain lions. Then they've had the hunting season trying to shoot them down, and these were antlerless too. I mean, we didn't go over there to hunt bulls. We went over to get, just a cow elk. And then you remind people that even today now, I think there's close to 5,000 bison in the park. At the time, I don't believe there were that many, but all these factors come together, and together influenced the reduction of the elk herd down to 4,000. It was not wolves that took them from 20,000 to 4,000. It was a combination of all these factors. And winter severity is one of the biggest indicators of, how a population's going to do.
So when you said it was in decline even before you reintroduced wolves, like what was that specific because it was getting crowded out for habitat and there were other predators and then obviously harsh winters? Like was it the kind of thing where it's like, well, it was 20,100 and then it was 20,000 flat? Or was there really like a sharp decline of, hey, over the last 10 years, we went from 25,000 to 20,000?
It was a decline. It was a gradual decline. This just didn't happen overnight because at the elk in Yellowstone, they migrate out in the winter. They go north into that region outside the park. But you got to remember during the wolf reintroduction too, we introduced only 31 wolves into the park. And that population, it takes time to grow. And so, I mean, it's 31 wolves in the park doesn't suddenly change the whole outlook on elk management. So yeah, it was a gradual thing, and I believe the highest population of wolves in Yellowstone ever got was like 172 wolves. Sounds like a lot, but it's not that many when you're in an elk environment like that.
Right. And obviously the wolves don't just eat elk, right?
No, and they scavenge. A lot of what wolves eat even today is gut piles, bone piles, and now, I mean, off the topic of elk, I mean, you got the bison hunts that are going on around the park. And I was just over there about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and there's bison carcasses being fed on by wolves, fresh tracks there. So, yeah, it's not like a wolf goes out and eats every day and kills an elk every day, and they can hunt ground squirrels certain times of the year. They eat a variety of things. They kill things and they scavenge things. And cumulatively, that's what keeps them all alive. But it's just not this cut and dried wolves run down an elk every day, kill it, and the elk just diminish.
With regard to bison, because you brought up the bison herd in a reason why the population of elk might have dropped in Yellowstone. You also related that mule deer are in competition. So essentially the idea that I think I was getting from you is, look, you have predation, right? You have bad winters. You have a lot of things pushing on these populations, but you also have competition for resources between different species, right? So you have mule deer, you have bison, you have elk, you have all of these animals that are all largely looking for the same type of habitat. And if one explodes, like if you went from 5,000 bison to 10,000 bison or 20,000 bison, that would be far fewer resources for the remaining species to compete with. Am I getting that idea correct?
You are absolutely correct.
So what is the relationship then, do you think, with different species? For instance, some people have attributed the drop in mule deer populations to wolves. And you're pointing out that there are plenty of herds, for instance, in Wyoming, populations of elk that are doing very well. So as you have an explosion of elk in, say, a state like Wyoming, would it be fair to say that that explosion would absolutely put pressure on other populations of, say, mule deer or things like that?
Absolutely. I mean, I went to college to become a wildlife biologist, and so I'm directed toward that interest, and I read a lot. And absolutely, if you want to enter this discussion with an open mind, you got to read about the competition that happens between elk and mule deer. And successful elk numbers are going to suppress mule deer. And mule deer, I mean, say they're dropping in a certain area because of, again, blaming the wolves. If you see these mule deer declines going on, it's all over the West. You hear talk about mule deer numbers going down. And I'll say, like in the recent winter, in the last, I believe, year before last, we had another severe winter here in south, mostly in the southern southeast part of Idaho. The mule deer took a hard hit. Some of the populations, they're talking 90-some% based on radial collared fawns and that, died because of snow. And there's hardly any wolves in that part of the country. But at the same time, the elk herds in Idaho made it through the winter successfully. They're tougher, they're stronger, and they're able to live with a severe winter that'll knock the heck out of mule deer. So there's all these factors that you got to be aware of that can cause these declines that people talk about. And again, you got to, first of all, go back to the Idaho Fish and Game is our example here. You got to look at what their counts and their surveys show. They're the experts. They're the people that measure the change in a mule deer population, because again, I'm hunting elk in Idaho now I hunt them with a 12-gauge shotgun. It's that easy for me. I don't even use the high-powered rifle anymore. Landowner requests too. But elk are doing fine. But if they're not doing fine, you got to look at the agency who's counting them and measuring them. Just because somebody went elk hunting for a week or two and didn't get an elk, and starts blaming certain factors like wolves, to me, that's meaningless because it's not logical what's going on.
When you talk about Idaho Fish and Game being the authority on collecting data, how is that data collected? Is it literally just aerial surveys? Is it, people going out with binoculars and standing on a high point? Like, how do they actually count these?
Yeah, it's all of the above. They do aerial counts in areas of the states where sightability is good, where you can the elk winter in open situations. They are easy to count from the air. They do less aerial surveys in real heavy forested areas, but they have ground counts. They have game wardens and biologists who work those regions of the state, and they count them from the ground, and they have their survey methods too. But yeah, they have a pretty good feel, and a lot of this is trend. Are you seeing more this year compared to last year or less? But they do have the pulse beat of what these herds are doing. And to call bullshit on Fish and Game counts, if you don't believe them, who do you believe? And I certainly don't believe a sportsman who lives in a certain spot somewhere that's telling me that the deer are up or the elk are down or whatever those factors are. It might be your luck. It might be your effort. It might be in your location. But you got to look at the big picture, what's going on statewide, not what's happening or not happening in your backyard.
There's unrelated to Fish and Game, but there's a new program, I believe, in Ada County that allows people to actually look at all of the pictures of every single ballot that's cast in a voting season, right? So like the elections we have coming up, you'll be able to pull up all of the ballots. So people that say, hey, these, the ballot counts are off, you could actually go through, if you want to, all 200 or 300,000, whatever number of ballots are cast, right? You could go through and actually hand count every single one of those if you wanted to. And I don't know that that's going to change a lot of opinions for people who are hell bent on the idea of a fraud within the voting system. I've talked to a lot of people in Secretary of State and the mechanisms they have in place to catch voter fraud, and they'll be the first to tell you, by the way, yeah, we do have voter fraud, somewhere in the range of just around a dozen people. One of them in particular, I heard Phil McGrain, the Secretary of State, giving a presentation recently, and he said, look, we actually collect signatures and compare the signatures from your voter registration to the signature on the actual ballot. And we found an inconsistency in one. And he said that the signature on the ballot was very well spelled out and full name with the middle initial, the whole thing. Well, the signature on the registration was not. It was like chicken scratch. And what we came to find out is that this was an 18-year-old that was off at college, and there was a mom who had cast a vote for him. And they were able to compare the actual signatures with this mail-in ballot. So that's the level of scrutiny they're bringing to every ballot that's cast, which I thought was incredible. Like, that's wild to think at scale people are able to do this. Is there a possibility that there could be more verifiable or shareable information, not verifiable, but more readily accessible information from Fish and Game where it's like, look, these are our aerial photos. Like, instead of having a body cam on a police officer, we put like a body cam on the underbelly of, a plane or something that allows people to recognize, like, look, this is the size of the herd we just counted. You can count every single head here if you want, but these are the pictures, or this is the video. Is there any attempt that you're aware of to do that?
Right now, today, talking about what they're doing today, I don't know, but I know in the olden days, when I was younger, yeah, you could actually take an aerial photo and you could use a pen or whatever you want to do. And yeah, and you could actually count every critter in that photo shot. But yeah, I'm sure if you really wanted to know, you could talk to an elk biologist for the state, and I'm sure they'd walk you through their methodologies. And then, they have trail cameras, there's a lot of other survey systems that they're developing. You put out trail cameras and look at how many critters pass in front of them over a certain time, and they're randomly placed. They're even trying that with wolves and other species too, to just another estimate, guesstimate kind of thing. And I know Fish and Game agencies, certainly they hear sportsmen talk too. I mean, guy walks in and says there's a problem. I'm sure they take that into consideration. You got one guy walks in, says it was the worst hunt I ever had, and the next guy walks in and says it was the best hunt I ever had. And they average those things together. So, yeah, you put all of this together to come to these conclusions, of what's going on, in the big picture out there.
Gotcha. You sent me another article that I actually kind of want to pull it up. You sent me another article that was talking specifically about the effects of a more mild winter on migration patterns, and that could lead to the milder winter could lead to less travel by the herd, which means the areas that people were expecting the herd to move up to go hunting would be then underpopulated, because they're like, well, we were expecting more, elk, right? But they're not moving up, not because the winter was bad and they died, but because the winter was actually mild. They didn't have to travel as far as they wanted to, up, down. I mean, wherever they're going, it doesn't matter to me. But I have, for instance, on the hills behind my house, we have elk that come in every single winter, and we see them, up on the ridge, and we always look at binoculars, and it's private land. I'm not going over there, but, you have these migration patterns that are disturbed by either good or bad weather. And to that end, you could actually manipulate people's perceptions in different areas of the population health of elk in the state. Am I essentially getting the idea correct?
Yeah, and a big factor in hunting elk, because I'm an elk hunter, tremendous effect on your success and failure is the kind of winter you have. If you have a dry winter and not a whole lot of snow, absolutely, it holds up big game, and a lot of them won't move off of these higher elevations until they get a good snow, which I think triggers their instincts. It's time to go to lower levels. But when you have dry winters, harvests of deer and elk very often are reduced simply because the hunter's got to go farther, and you got to climb back up in that country and work harder for the game if you want it. Otherwise, it's not going to come to you. And then you get a severe winter or a lot of deep snow, which stimulates the deer and the elk to move to lower elevations. Well, it plays into the human hunter's ability to be more successful, because you don't have to go as far. You don't have to work as hard. You might even be able to just shoot one off the road, or sit out in some meadow and have an easy opportunity. But yeah, it's how much human effort you got to put into it, how successful a season is. But if you again look across Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and this is all available on the internet, there's been near record hunts I'm going to say in the last 10 years. And Wyoming just had a record harvest, as I think I mentioned earlier, this past season. But Idaho's hunts, up until 2022, there was a 10-year average where I think hunters killed in excess of 20,000 elk. So you had almost a 10-year run of consistently near record harvests. And Montana's elk herds, I think there's probably, from the numbers I've seen lately, 30, 40,000 more elk in Montana today than there was when we did the wolf reintroduction into, say, Yellowstone, which is the closest to Montana.
Right. The perception is really what people experience, right? And I think that's what a lot of hunters are getting frustrated with. They're like, listen, I'm perceiving a lower frequency of elk. Lower population of elk, and I'm not happy about that. And I totally understand, right? Like, that makes perfect sense. Hey, look, if I'm expecting to go out and get an elk in a certain amount of time or in a certain location and I can't get that, that's a problem to me. So it seems that a lot of the discussion comes down to about population health or actual just gross numbers really comes down to people just expressing difficulty with engaging in the manner of hunting that they have previously. And I'm very sympathetic to that. It's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? Like you used to be able to hunt here. Maybe you learned how to hunt here with your dad or your grandpa, or this is where you have access to. What do we do about that? Because it seems that the access to this stuff, either by reducing the number of, shifting in population for weather or whatever reason, or predation, whatever it might be, shifting those population numbers and geography where they exist, that's problematic to people, right? As well as, you have private industry that's buying up land and populations are growing there. So those factor into state level numbers, but that doesn't help anyone, right? It's like, unless you got the $50,000 to buy the tag.
Yeah, and probably the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about is what you kind of alluded to, is you got public land and you got private land. And I can tell you, just moving out to Montana in the mid 70s compared to now, and where I've lived in Montana and Idaho, is access to private land is getting tougher and tougher all the time. You got to know somebody. You got to be familiar with some farmer or rancher and cultivate that relationship, or have known them for a long time, because that's what's happening. These huge ranches that I'm aware of up in Montana, and some here in Idaho too, they're being bought up by very wealthy individuals who have kind of locked the gates, shut the roads, cutting contracts with their own private outfitters to take hunters on that ranch. And a lot of these big ranches come with certain privileges to graze public land. And some of these ranches now are using their private land to develop into irrigated hay meadows and alfalfa, and developing businesses, shipping out this high quality food to the livestock industry. And so then you got the public land up there is where, tell the hunters to go hunt. But where does the elk go when the first shots are fired up on the public land? Is run down onto this private land that says, you can't come in here. And when I lived in Montana, that was a frustration then, and that was 20 years ago, that you see a 200-300 head elk standing out in a hay meadow somewhere, and that's where they stay the rest of the winter. And the wealthy landowner says, no, you either pay me to hunt them or you can't get in. So you get all these frustrated people with tag in their pocket that see this temptation out there. And then annually, up around Townsend, Montana, you had the big elk shoot every year, where a whole bunch of pickup trucks and hunters gather and get frustrated, and somebody touches off a shot, and pretty soon there's 20, 30 elk shot out in the middle of the field, and wounded ones walking around, and they're all being poached because they don't have permission. Game wardens write citations, confiscate elk, and have to finish off wounded ones. And that's a whole different thing again that has nothing to do with predation. And one of the misnomers, again, I constantly argue about is everybody says, well, since you did the wolf reintroduction, the wolves have chased the elk down into the lowlands or down in these hay meadows and these fields, and they can't go home because the wolves are right there waiting for them. And that's a bunch of hooey, because you can go to western states in the winter where there are no wolves, and you'll see elk behaving the same exact way. They're going where there's good food and browse. And when they're down in those open meadows, not only do they get a good meal, they can lay down and look for predators, which aren't probably going to bother them because they're in a human-dominated domain where you got the landowner who's driving around keeping trespassers out. So again, all of these suggestions, that the wolves are chasing the elk down here, has nothing to do with it. But I hear it all the time, and I don't buy it. And these elk are smart. Why live up on a mountaintop eating bunch grass when I can feed my calf and lay right down here in a hay meadow all summer? So I'm just giving you a different perspective than a lot of people here, and rather than BS, prove me wrong.
Right. And again, each of the articles that we're talking about, I'll put up a bunch of links in the description so people can check them out. Because again, I felt bad after the first conversation because it seemed that everything got pinned on you and you were making up these numbers. It's like, look, if you want to get mad at somebody, get mad at Idaho Fish and Game. And it was like, I wouldn't encourage you to do it, but Carter's not making up these numbers himself, right? He's reporting what was published.
None whatsoever, no.
Right. So our discussion about the Wyoming herd being so large that they're considering unlimited tags for elk, I'll put that link up. These are things that are interesting to examine because, again, it's not. I don't fault people for being upset about. For instance, I'll give you an example. I make no qualms about the fact that I moved here from California. And look, I did not move here with blue hair. I don't like the blue hair. Like, I moved here because it wasn't blue. But what was interesting is when you talk about California, you talk about how liberal California is. But when you actually examine California on a map of red and blue, you realize the bulk of the state is red, right? Because you have a lot of agriculture, you have a lot of just rural areas in California. It's a big place and a lot of farming and whatnot. But from my perception of California, which was living in the SF Bay Area, it was insane. Like, it was the most liberal, insane, blue, crazy you've ever seen in your life. And there are horrible things happening there in the school district and then in law enforcement and politics. There's a proposition in is one of the city councilmen in San Francisco. I love this. I found this out recently. I was dying. I was like, God bless them, to make it illegal for a grocery store to close without giving due notice for 6 months. So if you own a grocery store, Carter, and you're in San Francisco, you may have to give 6-month notice to your customers in the county and the city that you're going to be closing down. So if you're running a business and you're losing money and you're like, this is it, it's over, I can't keep this up, you're going to have to stay open for 6 months because they don't want your customers having to be exposed to a food desert, right? Yep. It's insane. But again, you could look at a map and say, hey, Matt, the majority of California is red. So your perception that it's this crazy liberal blue, utopia is not fair. But that was what I was living in. So, like, screw you. Like, you have no idea what we had to go through living there. And we obviously left. I mean, that's an area I grew up in. It was not like that when I was a child. It was not like that when I was a teenager. It wasn't even like that as I was going through my 20s. It turned into hell. Okay. And we left that. That's my perception. So I have great sympathy for people that are saying, hey, look, I don't care what you say. Like, my life is meaningfully different now than it was before. But I do appreciate you saying, okay, that has a lot of factors, right? It's not, and let's say wolves eat elk. That's not a crazy thing to say. Like, wolves absolutely eat elk. They eat a lot of things, right? Elk populations go up and down based on a lot of things, right? The same with mule deer, for instance. You have competition between other herbivores that are just wandering around eating things that elk would like to eat. Weather affects them. Migration patterns affect your perception. So I'm sympathetic to people. And then again, the last piece is obviously private land and the usage of private land and the mechanism by which people have started gaining revenue from selling these tags. And people are just, again, it's a problem. Like people are experiencing this thing and it's very real for them. It's as real as my issue living in the Bay Area, saying like, this is insane. So what do we do about that? Like, how do we, for the people that are being affected by this, like, for instance, let's acknowledge if we killed every single wolf in the entire state of Idaho right now, boom, they're all dead. We would still have fluctuations of harvest numbers. We would still have areas that people are expecting elk to migrate into, and depending on a hard or a soft winter, they may or may not actually go there. We would still have fluctuations in state level populations, right? Like, I'm not wrong on this.
These fluctuations have gone on since time eternal. I mean, nothing really changed with wolves. They're one more factor. It's a fact they eat elk, absolutely. But if you got rid of what wolves that exist here in Idaho, whatever they estimate, 1,300 wolves, no. Because if you look at the statistics, and I don't want to get into statistics, it turns people off, but who's more successful killing elk calves? Mountain lions, black bears, and grizzly bears. Wolves are way down the list. So, and who's always been here? Mountain lions, black bears, and grizzly bears. The wolf was gone. We reintroduced them. Yeah, it's another mouth to feed. And interestingly, because of good habitat conditions, the elk numbers have increased despite the fact that we reintroduced wolves. So, you can blame what you want to blame for your success for or not successful hunting, but the wolf, he's the scapegoat in all of this, and the dots don't connect, not from all of the information that I have.
The view of wolves that is very popular amongst a lot of hunters, that they're terrible and they're vermin, and there are bounties on them, and there are organizations that are very much promoting wolf hunting, right? This is not a secret to anyone. That the viewpoint has been not the viewpoint that, hey, we should reimburse people that are hunting wolves or giving a bounty, but the viewpoint that they're these horrendous, horrible things has led some people to act in a bonkers way. Like bonkers as in like that. How did somebody think that was a good idea? You sent me an article of, what was his name? Cody Roberts?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Down in Wyoming.
Right. Explain, and again, I'll give a link to the story. Explain what happened with Cody Roberts.
Well, as I read in the media, and there's been just tons of articles written, an individual from Daniels, Wyoming, went out on his snow machine and found or located a approximately 9-month-old female wolf, ran it down with his snowmobile, disabled it, whether he hit it, ran over it, whatever. It's called, I'll digress and say, coyote whacking is perfectly legal in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. You can run down coyotes, hit them with your snowmobile, knock them senseless, and then render them helpless by parking your snow machine right on top of them, and then beating them to death or shooting them. This is legal.
Okay. Quick question. Are you meaning to say wolf whacking or coyote whacking?
Well,
or is the term coyote whacking, but can be used for wolves?
Yes.
Okay.
Coyote whacking has been the phrase, and it's been the practice, and it's been legal for decades. Because when I lived in Montana and I left there 24 years ago, they were coyote whacking coyotes up there then.
Gotcha.
All right. So this Cody Roberts guy just wolf whacked. He went out because it's legal. There's nothing unacceptable about it, because apparently on the books you can. So he disabled this wolf, don't know, probably created internal injuries. Long story short, he brought this wolf to town alive with duct tape wrapped around its muzzle and took it home, took pictures, video, then ended up bringing it to, I believe, a family member's bar in town, and had this wolf with a shock collar on its neck, visible on pictures and video, and this duct tape on its muzzle. And the wolf was so weak and so unable to defend itself or even react that it laid helplessly with its feet free on the floor, where he was kissing it and people were laughing. And so, I mean, you had apparently people in the bar thinking this was cool. It just created an outrage from internationally. I mean, I think Wyoming has been inundated with tens of thousands, without exaggerating, emails, letters, phone calls, and whatever other ways people can express their dismay that something like this happened. And I guess my argument is, as a citizen, I hope Wyoming, Idaho, Montana stop labeling predators as vermin and treating them that way, because it's the way the laws are written and how laws are permissive that it's okay that somehow animals like, say, the coyote, don't deserve any dignity or respect for their lives, that it's okay to go out and run over them with a snowmobile or chase them down in a pickup truck and all the other ways you can kill them. So I've read where the governor of Wyoming was outraged. It was unacceptable. I heard the director of Fish and Game say the same thing. I mean, this is all published information. This isn't my made-up take on it. But for lawmakers to be outraged, or governors, and allow this kind of behavior to keep going on by having these permissive laws and by having labels on animals that they deserve to die because they're nothing but a pest or a vermin or a problem or whatever you want to be. In my opinion, this stuff's got to get fixed somehow. I don't know how, but we got, to me, hunting is fair chase. And you get away from putting one foot in front of the other, and you start going to gizmos and gadgets and snowmobiles and ATVs. I'm not going to go off into dogs, but I mean, there's all kinds of ways to kill animals. But to me, hunting is fair chase. When you're killing them with a snowmobile, it has nothing to do with hunting. And I'm really disappointed if hunters continue to accept the fact that psychopaths and sociopaths can go out and do this thing and give hunting a black eye. Hunters should be waking up to the same thing. This is unacceptable. If you think hunting is such a good sport to defend, and it's your recreational enjoyment, and I'm a hunter, again, I'm going to say it, I'm not somebody from outside. I've hunted with the best of them. I started hunting when I was 9 years old. But let's get it down to fair chase. And if you can't keep up, and if you can't go hunting fair chase and successfully get your deer or elk or whatever you're hunting, maybe you ought to just find some other hobby.
The reading and just you recounting it, reading about what happened to the wolf at the bar and then how he took it out back and just shot it in the head. It does give me a large amount of pause because, again, I waded into this. I'm not going to say argument because I'm not arguing for any. I'm just trying to talk to people about what's going on. So people have as much information and they can make their own determination about what they want to participate in and what they don't, and what programs they can help with and what's available. But hearing about that, it's kind of like, I don't think anybody would tolerate that kind of behavior with like a baby elk, right? Like you couldn't take a baby elk to a bar after you ran it over and like piss on it and kiss it and just like do all kinds of weird things. And again, I understand frustration people have with, or the frustration they have that they blame wolves for. And again, I'm not saying they're right or wrong. They're just saying, hey, look, this is my experience. This is what I think. Fine. Totally fine. It's none of my affair. But regardless of that, it doesn't sound like this is a type of behavior that would be tolerated for anyone else.
No, and let's talking about wolves right now. Where do you think all our domestic dogs come from? I mean, would you do that to your dog? Your dog is a Canis, same genus. Coyotes are Canis latrans, wolves Canis lupus, dogs Canis familiaris. They're all the same, folks. They got a little bit different shape, and some are socialized and domesticated while others run wild. But would you do that to your dog or your neighbor's dog, and as you mentioned, any other species? And there's some really ugly pictures out there with coyotes too. I mean, to run over them, pin them to the ground, grab them by the legs, and these videos, they're out there if you got the stomach to watch them, and pick these coyotes up over your head and bash their heads in on the skis of the snowmobile. This is where I wish we as sportsmen could move forward. If you're going to be a hunter, I respect that. Got no problem with it. But if it's not fair chase and it's not showing dignity and respect for the animal, then I'm all for stopping it. And I know I'm just one voice out there, but that's my perspective.
Yeah. Well, Carter, listen, this is round 2. I appreciate your perspective. I'm really happy we were able to talk about a lot of things that are finding representation in the media. So it's not pinned solely on you. And I think, again, your perspective is a very valuable one. You're a wildlife biologist. you have decades of experience in this, and again, still an active hunter. I have not heard on or off air you advocate for stopping hunting or anything like that. Like, obviously not. But again, it's kind of how we act around these things, right? And
Well, yeah, just show respect for a sentient being, whatever it is, and let's get rid of the labels. I mean, wolves are not good; they're not bad, but they're certainly not bad, because I can tell you far more good things wolves do than bad. But it's what we do. We villainize certain species to maybe make it more permissive. So you can. I'm speaking for somebody else now. I want to trap, so long as we label them as they're bad, they're a problem, they need control. You magnify the bad parts that you see in a wolf to perpetuate what you want to do. You want to keep hunting them or trapping them or whatever. But let's do it legal, but let's get rid of the labels. And same with, another thing that just bugs the hell out of me is this bounty system. When I was a kid, they had pocket gophers and crows in Iowa that they had a bounty on them. And you learned as a little kid that, a pocket gopher's bad. They dig holes in the ground, they make mounds of dirt, and they plug up the cutting bars on the balers and things. And so they're evil. So you kind of think of them that way. And so now we got bounties on wolves. Drop the bounties. There's no need for them. They're just a waste of money, putting money in somebody's pocket to give them just one more motivation to go out there and kill something. But if you want to legally hunt a wolf, be my guest.
well, I appreciate you. I really appreciate your perspective. I really appreciate all the information you share with me and the time you come in here. Is there anything else that we've missed for the day?
Oh, we could go on and on.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll have a round 3. I'm trying. I mean, we can only tolerate so much time on the air. I know that.
No, I stand by everything I said is provable, readable, easily accessed on the internet. Everybody has a cell phone and a computer.
Right.
And when you challenge somebody by simply dismissing what they say by calling BS or you're a liar, I suggest when you challenge somebody and tell them they're a liar that you will attach your source of information, your source of research, your source of facts to verify and confirm and back up what you say. Simply telling somebody you don't believe them and they're a liar without offering another source of information supporting your position, that doesn't prove anything.
Right. And to be clear, I have had several guests on now that do not 100% agree with you. That's totally, and I'm not saying like they don't. They're like, hey, no, I feel like wolves. One guy I very much enjoys, Seth, with Gem State Kennel. He's like, listen, I get paid to hunt wolves for a specific rancher, and he said we had several instances where a livestock was killed that was not the weakest in the herd, and it was not consumed, and it was this healthy animal that was absolutely going to go on to be something that they could take to market, not like the scrub animals they put in as decoys. Like, his position is that wolves absolutely do at times hunt for sport. He said, look, I like hunting. Why wouldn't a wolf like hunting? Right. I have to practice hunting. You got to teach wolves how to hunt. Wolves teach other wolves how to hunt. Like, that's how it goes. Right. So look, let's just look at the perspectives. Let's just, and again, Seth disagreed with things you said, but he brought his specific experiences and his information. That's totally fine. We don't all have to agree, but at least let's have reasonable conversations around the issues. And if we can get on the same page, that's where we're probably going to get the best results for everyone.
Yep. Well, and maybe if we have round number 3 someday, that I can tell you about 30 years of my experience working with wolves and livestock problems. There's probably nobody out there that's looked at more dead sheep and cattle and horses and skinned their hides off of them than I have. So, I can talk about, absolutely certain carnivores are predators and they do kill livestock. But I can give you my perspective someday on the fact that I don't think these animals hunt for sport. They hunt to feed themselves. And it's very obvious to me. These are discussions I hear all the time too. Well, they killed 19 elk, or, somebody went hunting and I found 19 elk carcasses and they never ate a one. I've hunted elk out west now for going on, close to 50 years. And I've never stumbled onto a carcass in my hunting career that wolves had killed and not eaten, down to the fragments of leftover bone and flesh. And what they didn't eat, the coyotes and the ravens and the golden eagles cleaned up. So again, maybe sometime we can talk about it. But to me, wolves are very efficient. And when they kill something, there's almost never anything left unless human intervention interrupts the kill and being able to consume it.
Well, I'll take you up on that. Round 3 coming up. I appreciate your card. Thank you for coming in, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.